If you have followed politics in this country, you have seen his byline many times. Adam Nagourney is a well-known correspondent with the New York Times who's covered politics. He'll be back in Iowa for the caucuses there. He's also the author of a new book, The Times, How the Newspaper of Record Survived Scandal, Scorn, and the Transformation of Journalism. Adam, nice to see you. Thanks for taking the time. Before we get into the book, let's talk about the campaign. The Democrats really are concerned about Joe Biden. They have to be. We have seen poll after poll after poll where Joe Biden is trailing Donald Trump in every major battleground state. It's fair to say they have to be worried.
I think they're very worried, and I think that for good reason. I was one of those people back in 2020 who always thought that Biden was, likely to win that race because for all the obvious reasons, like he just seemed the obvious person, the strongest candidate the Democrats have. I'm not quite as sure about that. He is carrying a lot on his shoulders right now. I think Democrats say with some justification that he's had an awfully effective first term, but the Middle East is a real problem. And people talk about the economy. I don't think it's just the economy, it's inflation. And you and I might know that inflation has come down a bit, but it's hard to convince people of that when they're going to the gas station or they're going to the grocery store. Stuff's really expensive. And in my experience, there are few issues that are more motivating of voters than inflation. So Biden's got to get past that. Again, we are a year out. It's a long time. And the comparison will come into focus. The former president, presumably going to be on trial. When it's a big difference between this sort of hypothetical period now when people are going, the idea of Trump versus the reality of Biden. That changes, when you get to September, October. But right now, I think Democrats are concerned, and with good reason.
Now, let's talk about your book. It's rare that somebody is writing about their employer. You started this book about how the New York Times was going to navigate what the new world of digital journalism. Back when you weren't sure how it was going to end, this was years ago. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I had no idea. I knew I wanted to talk about the drama of this incredibly, in my opinion, important newspaper and these fascinating people who run it and who make it. I did not know how the book would end. For all I knew, this was back in 2016. The Times might not exist at all, or it might exist in a very diminished state. As it turned out, this is a long, rocky story with all kinds of struggles and setbacks, which I think I detail, but it has a clear ending. The New York Times today is a profitable organization, but more than that, from my perspective as a journalist, I think it has figured out how to operate in a digital world.
So in the book, you talk about how the New York Times is actually a conservative paper, small c, not in terms of politics, but that there was a tremendous amount of pushback. A lot of people didn't even know how you could possibly read a newspaper, a paper newspaper online.
The fact of the matter is that there were a lot of people at the paper, certainly in the 80s and into the 90s, who were really skeptical of the idea that people would ever get their news off of a tablet. There's one famous executive editor named A. Rosenthal who said something to the effect of, I can see people reading their news off a black box. I don't know what he meant by that, but they're always going to want paper in their hands. Well, that's just wrong, right? And again, you see another executive editor wrote a memo I came across to the publisher saying this is madness because they want to send out a daily fax of the top stories in the Times that day. But there were also, and this is really important in my view, people who were forward thinking. There were people who were thinking about the future and who could see the way the world was going. There's a bunch of them, but for the purposes of the story, probably the most interesting one was the publisher, Arthur Sulzberger Jr., who's publisher for most of the period of this book. And he always sort of never had that kind of allegiance to print that so many people did. He started his job working for, I think, the Associated Press, the wire service, which meant that he would write a story and it would go out on the wire. So he never had this idea like maybe me, right, that you write a story and it's published in paper the next day. And the other thing was, he's a Star Trek fan, right? So he would say quite literally, I don't care if we have to beam the information into their craniums, we're going to get it there. And I think that kind of thinking eventually infused the newsroom.
Adam Nagourney of the New York Times, who I should point out, you're based in Los Angeles. Your new book, which is a great Christmas gift if you're still shopping later today, The Times, How the Newspaper of Record Survived Scandal, Scorn, and the Transformation of Journalism. Thanks very much for joining us, and great to see you.
Back at you. Thank you for having me. I'm a big fan. I'm honored to be on the show. Thank you.